How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yep.
The gallery.
Can everybody see the poll? Yeah, you can give more than one answer. So, but there's, in the Sermon on the Mount, there's the word sin is used, and there's actually more than one way to understand the word. And so you can, this is kind of a way to reflect on what some of those different meanings might be. So.
Mm.
You just log in, there's already a test. Can you believe it?
My name is Gene Fisher. I signed up. I missed the first meeting, unfortunately. I signed up for this because I was intrigued by the title.
Yeah.
So
Glad you could be with us. So yeah, it's not that uncommon with adult ed for people to miss a session or two. We actually we have a recording of it that we're going to put on the first session that'll go on our Facebook member and friends page. And then we'll put this one on there too. And so you can people who miss a session can catch up.
So is there a format, or how does this work?
Yeah, well, sorry, get you oriented. We're right now we're letting people in. I'll be able to.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of technical things. So while you're coming in, there is a questionnaire. You can answer. You can choose more than one answer. The reason we're doing this particular question is the word sin is used in the Sermon on the Mount, and how you interpret that word may make the difference in how you interpret a passage. So if you interpret it one way, it has different implications than if you interpret it another way. And since this is a Unitarian church, we're open to hearing all the different interpretations that might come from how we look at one particular word.
Chris, is the questionnaire, are you going to be posting it later, or did I miss it?
Oh, can you not see it?
I can't.
You should be able to see it. I'm trying to think. Let's see, I hadn't thought about what we would do if somebody, because last week I couldn't see it. And so there are sometimes technical glitches. So,
is everybody else seeing it when they come on? Lynn, you saw it, because okay, so Lynn saw it.
Oh.
Huh.
Interesting.
that is pretty interesting.
Patty, did you see it when you came in? You're on mute.
I saw it, but it went away.
Yes, it popped up when I came in.
Hey, well, that's interesting. I'm trying to figure out. there's some mysteries that we haven't figured out.
Huh.
I think for our purposes, it's kind of a conversation starter. So, I mean, ideally we'd have everybody vote, but we can all participate in the conversation that comes out of it.
People might want to look and see if it's behind their window.
Oh yeah, maybe do that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, if you could minimize your Zoom screen and see if it's hanging out behind that screen on your computer.
I know some people have come in. Can everybody, the new people come in, can you see the poll that's up?
I saw it when I came in, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I can see it.
All right, great. So you can pick more than one answer. All right. I'll be doing some repeating for people who've already been in here. Well, maybe I'll wait a minute. So we got some more folks coming in.
Cool. Oh, I didn't know this. Oh. So you know him. Well, yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's see what time it is. All right. Can everybody see the quiz?
Nope.
No.
Who said they can't see it? Oh, so you still can't see it, Jackie? Wasn't hiding behind the
No. I did that, but it's not there.
Well, I wish I could figure out what's going on there, but you can be a rich part of the conversation because that's really kind of what it's all about. So for those of you who've come in since I did this spiel before, is the reason for the poll is the word sin is used in the Sermon on the Mount a number of different times, and how you think about it can make all the difference in terms of how you interpret a passage or really you'll see in the last one if we do good, we're gonna get to lust in our hearts. So that'll be that's everybody's favorite part of the Sermon on the Mount. So but that's where your idea of what is sin makes a big difference. So all right. Okay. So I'll go in a little bit into these different categories. Missing the mark's a very Jewish understanding of sin, which is, you've got this ideal of how you should be and you haven't quite lived up to it. Along those lines, I sometimes say only good people can be sinners because only good people are trying to be good. So it's if you're not trying, then you won't miss the mark. So that's but it's more about your actions, and so separation from the ground of all being. Then that's sort of a sense of the next two are almost, instead of your actions, is about your relationships. Are you connected to or separate from the ground of all being? That's Paul Tillich's language for God, or the big picture or ultimate reality. And so and then a humanistic understanding might be separation for others. Sin is what separates us from other people. Eastern influences often folk have an ignorance wisdom kind of thing. So like if you're often people act in ways out of ignorance, so it's less about malice and trying to do people wrong. It's because you have the wrong mindset, and you think you're doing what's good for you, but really you're not. So what's Bhagavad Gita says, when you realize the God in you is the God in everybody, then you stop hurting others and stop hurting yourself, or stop hurting yourself by hurting others. So that ignorance is at the heart of it. So human nature is original sin. I once heard somebody say the difference between shame and guilt is when you've done something wrong, and shame is when you feel like I am wrong or there's something wrong with me. So in original sin, there is something wrong with you. You came out of the womb with original sin. You didn't do anything. I mean, the baby doesn't do anything in the womb. I sometimes say Augustine thought sin was a sexually transmitted disease because he did actually use that language, that it's passed down through the sexual act. So, and then id over ego, the idea that your kind of appetite self conquering over your ideal self. So that's another way to think about it. And then Carl Rogers called sin self-hatred. Every sinful thing is an act of that harms you, So it comes from self-hatred. So those are some ideas. Has everybody had a chance to weigh in? You can choose more than one thing.
I guess I'm just not too happy we're starting with that tonight.
Oh, yeah, why not? So yeah, let's get down to.
Let me explain.
Yeah.
I don't think there's such a thing as original sin.
Yeah.
I know St. Augustine made his popularity on that. To me is just BS.
Yeah.
I think there truly is evil.
Yeah.
I think there is goodness, but I do not believe sin should even be in the dictionary. It doesn't exist for me. It makes no freaking sense.
I think sin is like a lot of religious words. It's old enough that it's had multiple meanings attached to it, and so and that's actually one of the reasons Bible study can be a really difficult thing, because in the Jewish tradition, so the idea of original sin is based on this story in Genesis, but Jewish people read the story in Genesis and do not have an idea of original sin. So it's different people reading the same book and getting different meanings out of it. But you'll actually just see as we go along how the way you interpret that word might make all the difference in how you read a passage, and what it means.
Okay.
So has anybody got any questions about any of those categories? Has everybody had a chance to vote? We've got a nice little spread out there. So I often like to say the thing about Freud is it shows you how talking about these things requires metaphors, So psychology is ostensibly a more scientific school of thought. But, if you dissect somebody, you won't find an id or an ego or a superego, you just won't find them. And it's not that different. The id's not that different from the devil on one shoulder, and the superego is not that different from an angel on the other shoulder, kind of whispering different advice, and the ego is trying to figure out the best way forward. So you just end up being with metaphors, Okay. So it looks like we're pretty spread out. Our top choices are missing the mark, victory of id over ego and super ego, and then we're spread out in smaller categories. 11% at separation from others, and then 6% for pretty much everything else. So there we go. So keep that in mind as we go forward. That'll be when we talk about it. You'll see why that matters. So, okay. All right. I've got an opening reading. So last week we covered a lot of territory with the Beatitudes, and I posted in the TBUC members and friends and Facebook pictures of stained glass windows from Arlington Street Church that were based on the Beatitudes. So that's something you can look at sometime, just as another way to think about them. Our opening reading comes from a man who's Ohiesa. He was Lakota Sioux, Native American, and he was raised with indigenous people that were still roaming. They were still hunters and gatherers and warriors and moving about. And then under certain circumstances, he ended up being in a boarding school where he trained to be a doctor. So he's an interesting person in that he kind of was trained to be a doctor in 19th century kind of medicine but also had the native perspective. And his Anglo name was Charles Alexander Eastman, and his native name was Ohiesa. So he comes to the conclusion that Jesus was a Native American. That's what he says. So this is interesting. He says, I've come to the conclusion that Jesus was an Indian. He was opposed to material acquirement and to great possessions. He was inclined to peace. He was as unpractical as any Indian and set no price on his labor of love. These are not principles upon which the white man has founded his civilization. It is strange that he could not rise to these simple principles which were commonly observed among my people. The Christ ideal, it has grown upon me steadily, but I also see more and more plainly our modern divergence from that ideal. There we go. We expect that a little bit. He continues, I confess, and I have wondered much that Christianity is not practiced by the very people who vouch for that wonderful conception of exemplary living. It appears that they are anxious to pass on their religion to all races of men, but keep very little for themselves. I have not yet seen the meek inherit the earth or the peacemakers receive high honor. So
Exactly.
So I think that's kind of is where part of what we're doing. Those who missed the first session is we're looking at teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, but we're contrasting them with some other teachings that are found in other world religions and world cultures. And sometimes, like, you know, I find that very insightful. You know, that there is at the heart of this something that's really more countercultural than people are wanting to embrace. Give lip service to it, but not life service to it. So that's an interesting insight. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit before we look at a particular verse is the wisdom tradition. Because when people ask me where does Unitarian Universalism fall in its approach to the Bible, I would call it the wisdom tradition. And the wisdom tradition is old as the Jewish and Christian scriptures, but it's also found in other world religions. So the wisdom tradition is if something is wise, then you can adopt it. It doesn't matter where it came from. It doesn't matter where it came from. And if you look at the book of Proverbs and the Bible, those verses are proverbs from many different cultures and many different religious traditions that have been assembled into a Jewish book and sometimes given a little bit of a Jewish spin to them. But the reason they belong in the book is not because they originated with Judaism. The reason they're in the book is because they're wise. And so when you come out of the wisdom tradition, and that's one of many strands of the biblical tradition, that's what you do. And so you're looking for wisdom. So in our time, if you find something that's true in Buddhism, or you find something that's true in Confucianism, or you find something that's true, that you can integrate it into your belief system. If it's wise, it belongs to you. And Emerson always said we need to edit our own Bibles, our own collection of wisdom from wherever we got it. And so along that line, that actually some books of the Bible are that. Somebody collected wisdom from different places and put it together in the book. And it often, wisdom tradition is okay with asking difficult questions, like the book of Job comes up from the wisdom tradition. And some of the received wisdom, even in the book of Proverbs, is, you know, if you're a good person, good things will happen to you. If you're a bad person, bad things will happen to you. And then Job's a good man and bad stuff happens to him. And so, and so what's that about? So it's wisdom. It's grappling with things that don't work out exactly like the rules suggest they might. So, so I mentioned that because this is a way you can approach the Sermon on the Mount. You can say, "Oh, this is insightful." Oh, I don't really resonate with this. Oh, I totally disagree with this. You can kind of do it like gem mining, you kind of sift and when you do that, you're doing what is a long historic tradition. You're not just being a contemporary Unitarian, although that's part of it too. So the other tradition that's very important in the formation of Unitarianism, other than the wisdom tradition, is the prophetic tradition. And in the prophetic tradition, it's not so much about the rituals you do. It's not so much about your acts of personal and private piety. It's about justice. And, the prophet Amos, speaking for the divine as the prophets do, says, "I hate and despise your rituals. I hate and despise your ceremonies, but let justice roll down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." And the reason I mention that is you'll hear some of that prophetic critique of, kind of paying attention to the rules and paying attention to the fine details of the rules, and not enough emphasis on mercy. The prophet Micah is a good example of that too. He says, what does the Lord require of you? Not these big sacrifices, not these big ceremonies, not these big rituals, but to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So it's about how you live. So I think that's another theme in the Sermon on the Mount. It's about how you live. It's not about, there's no rules for any rituals. If you look in the book of Deuteronomy, you'll see long lists of exactly how to do a certain ritual or how to build the tabernacle or how, so, and that's not in the Sermon on the Mount. The focus is on kind of social responsibility more than private piety, righteousness more than ritual. I think it's Isaiah said, "The fasting that I want is to unleash the bonds of the oppressed." That's instead of this kind of private self ritual, something that produces social justice. Okay, so we did the Beatitudes last week, and so let me pull up our next part of the reading that we're doing. I should have had this called up. Just take me a second. Okay. There we go. Okay, this verse will be familiar to people. If you ever sang the song, "This Little Light of Mine," you will recognize this one. And before I put it in there, I'll tell you a Hindu story. So there's let's see. I'm trying to figure my computer's doing something funny. All right. Let's see. So the Hindu story is a Hindu legend is that when human beings were early on the earth, they were like gods. They had all the power of gods, and all the other gods were jealous, and they were concerned that human beings might get to be too powerful. And so they decided to take that divine power away from the human beings, and they had to figure out where to hide it. And so one of the gods says, "Well, maybe we should put it on top of the tallest mountain." And they say, "No, human beings are clever. They'll figure out how to get to the top of the tallest mountain. They'll find divinity there. And, that's not a good idea." And somebody says, "Well, maybe we'll dig a hole down deep in the earth and we'll bury it and hide it, and they'll never find it." And say, "No, human beings are too clever. They'll figure out where we hid it, and they'll dig it up and they'll find the divinity." And then somebody says, "Well, let's put the divinity down at the bottom of the ocean. They'll never think to look there." Another god says, "Well, no, these human beings are really very, very clever. One day they'll figure out how to build, submarines or something. They'll go down to the deep bottom of the deepest ocean. They'll find the divinity there. And then finally, one of the other guys says, I know where we can hide it. We can hide it deep down inside of each person. No one will ever think to look there. So that's the story. And that story can influence how we hear this next reading, which is in the chat now. Who wants to read it for us? This is called the salt and light part.
I do.
Okay, great.
Number 13, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. 14, you are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven.
Okay. So you are the salt of the earth. And Amy Jill Levine's written a really good book called, it's about the Sermon on the Mount, and she is a professor of Jewish studies and New Testament at Vanderbilt. So it's interesting. Her goal is to how would Jesus's original Jewish audience hear things rather than the church hundreds of years later would hear that. And so she looks at some of the images that were associated with salt in that time. Salt is a simple element. It's an enhancer. It's a seasoning. We can't live without salt. So these are some of the qualities that may influence how we hear that. In Jesus's time, it was also a commodity, and some portion of the Roman soldiers' wages was in salt, which is actually sell and salary. It comes from that idea. So anyhow, in the desert culture, salt was very valuable. And so essentially say you are very valuable. There are some teachings in the Upanishads, which are some of the very ancient Indian traditions that uses some of the same language. One of the Upanishads reads, as when a lump of salt is thrown into water and therein being dissolved cannot be grasped again, but wherever it flows, it tastes salty. So this sense, and this is in Indian tradition, this is talking about Brahma, ultimate reality. God is like salt. You can't see salt, but when you find something that tastes salty, it's present. And then the Upanishads say, when we are silent, then our soul is like a lamp whose light is steady, for it burns in a shelter where there is no wind. So there's some of that imagery of salt and light. There's even mustard seed imagery, which, comes up later in some of the Upanishads. So I think part of where we drive at that is, some of the imagery in religion comes from these elements, that are all around us, light and salt and seeds. There's sort of these metaphors lying around for us to deal with. Any thoughts on these passages before I say anything more? There's a paradox in this is you'll hear between what should be public and what should be private. And so you see here, if you listen to some preachers who talk about you're saved by grace, you're saved by faith, your works are straw, your works are nothing, and you read this verse, you're like, wait, where are you coming from? Because the verse says, let your light shine before others so they will see your good works. So they will see your good works. And so there is in the biblical tradition a debate between those who think we're saved by faith and those who I don't know, James wouldn't say we're saved by faith, but he would say faith without works is dead. You show me your faith without works, and I through my works will show you my faith. So that is a sense that it has to be manifest. You have to be able to see it. You have to be able to, you know, it should make a difference in the world. It shouldn't just be doing that. But you know, you'll hear Jesus say later that, you know, some people just do things to be seen by others, you know. So there's a paradox here. He's saying people should see you when you're doing good things, and that's a testimony. But obviously it needs to come from someplace other than ego. So it needs to be not look at me spirituality. It needs to be, you know, the difference between shining a light and squirting a light, or, you know, you know. I had a friend who was an Episcopal priest who said there's two kinds of ministers. One takes you to the window and shows you the light. The other takes you to the window and poses in front of the light. So I think Jesus says over and over, don't be a poser. I mean, and you can almost substitute the word Pharisees, which we'll get to later, with poser. You know, if you're going to be like the posers, you know, it works as a modern translation. So what is, you know, the other thing about this is this light. In John, Jesus says, I am the light, you know, I am the light of the world. And in Matthew, he says, you are the light of the world. So, you know, what is it? We talked about last week, these biblical traditions come from different oral traditions. And so there's some differences here, you know. So Matthew's saying, you are the light. And John is saying, I am the light. And that's, you know, some people harmonize those by saying, you know, there's divine light in everybody. It shines brighter in others. You know, the Orthodox Quakers have a phrase that we all have a measure of that light which Christ had without measure. The sense that you are the light. There's some divine spark, divine image in you that shines. So in some ways your works aren't just like ego. They're like a window that makes room for the light. So there's an old preacher story about a preacher. He says, you know, the goal in life is to be like a window pane through which a light shines. The light can shine. We're supposed to be like a pane through which the light shines. But many of us are just like wax paper, and I'm just like wax paper. And so the light doesn't shine through as well, and it gets dim and it's blurry. And so we all fall short. And afterwards, somebody comes up to him and says, Reverend, you're not wax paper, you're a real pane. But that's at the heart of it is, what is this light? In Hindu, in the Hindu thought, that's Atman. You know, the divine light in you is Atman, and Brahman is everything that divine is bigger than you. So Brahman is the big picture divinity, and Atman is that divinity in you. I think we all have something greater than ourselves inside of ourselves. It'd be kind of a summary of the Upanishadic tradition. So this verse is very important in African American spirituality. The Unitarian Universalist Church in Atlanta that Duncan Teague is starting, that's blending African American and the Black church tradition with the Unitarian Universalist tradition. They sing this little light of mine every Sunday. It's built into every Sunday, and it's that central. It was you know, it was important before the civil rights movement, but it was a song people would sing in the jails when they were being arrested for civil rights work. If the world doesn't see your light, the world doesn't appreciate your light, the world doesn't see you as a person worthy of dignity and respect and to be treated well. Well, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Won't let anyone blow it out. Won't hide it under a bushel. I'm going to let it shine. So that's an important part of that tradition. Any thoughts about that? Or any questions about anything yet? And I'm going to go to the next verse.
Chris?
Chris, Mary.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was looking for these verses to cut and paste in here. So go ahead, Mary.
No worries. I'm hearing Godspell, the soundtrack from Godspell in my head.
Oh, okay,
Because
yeah.
So many of the verses you've been talking about are reflected there. It's lovely music. And you're also reminding me of the comparison contrast of let my light shine to don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing.
Yeah.
And I think it all has, it informs us for moments, and to do the comparison and contrast without getting crazy about thinking about it dichotomously. It has to be one or the other.
Well, see, I think that's the hard, and we said, if you missed the first session, we said the great thing about the Sermon on the Mount is you can't be a literalist, and you can't be a legalist. It will defy any effort to codify it into law. It will defy any effort to practice it in a literal way. And that's why I think the word fall short falls. I think it often teaches us things that we do fall short of. We may aspire to do it, but we're not going to quite arrive. So here's the next verse. Somebody wants to read that, and this also has some paradox to it, and it's a longer stretch. So
I can do it if you want.
okay.
Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Okay. So that verse is Matthew is often called the Jewish gospel because it reflects this idea of Jewish as Jesus as a reinterpreting the Torah, offering a differing interpretation of the Torah, a new interpretation of the Torah, but not trying to get rid of it, not trying to throw it away, not trying to say it's invalid anymore. So Jesus keeps kosher. Jesus makes pilgrimage, goes to the synagogue. Jesus goes to the temple. He applies these rules, for lack of a better word, liberally or flexibly, and that's actually, we'll talk more about that later, but that's well within, Jewish tradition often has, somebody reads a verse and there's 5 different commentaries on it, so, and I've literally been in the room when rabbis were hammering it out, with very different views of a text. And that's just normal. It's not like, oh, they'll work through it and then we'll arrive at the shared understanding. No, it's not. So this verse sort of suggests that he didn't come to get rid of the tradition. There certainly are, we see with the Methodist, the thing with the Methodist Children's Home, they've forgotten the Jewish tradition was where Jesus was and never left. The Methodist Children's Home that wouldn't let a Jewish family adopt a child. So all the disciples were, and even Paul was. So that's a reimagining of tradition. There'll be some paradoxes later too. As a matter of fact, the next verse, you're like, wait, I thought he said don't. I didn't come to change anything, because he does suggest changes next. so that's just part of it. So, but if that interests you, the other thing about say that is Jewish tradition is the most Jewish part of the Christian tradition is James. Faith without works is dead. You know, it's a manifestation, and so that and sees Jesus in continuity with that. And then there's others that say it's Jesus is a radical break from that tradition. So in this verse, Jesus is stressing the continuity. And there's the line where he says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Earlier, we talked about you could substitute the word poser for Pharisee. The irony is Jesus actually probably was a Pharisee. The Pharisee tradition was actually the most flexible way of looking at the law and looking at the scriptures and would challenge things. So he was probably on the liberal progressive end of the Pharisees. But you know, some of the worst arguments are between people who have the same name, you know, and or belong to the same political party or religious party. So Jesus is always denouncing the Pharisees, but that doesn't mean he wasn't one. So just the way I always think people like Bono are always denouncing Christian leaders, and yet they are Christian themselves. So it's got that dynamic to it. There's also, I think, the scribes are the sense that you know, they're the people who have to have everything footnoted. You know, so. You know, you don't know what's right until you've done the research and read it and footnoted your actions with a particular verse. And I think there's definitely a critique here that you can't have faith secondhand. You know, George Fox said later, you know, in I think it's the 16th century, he said, he interrupted a church service by saying, you say Jesus saith this and the apostles saith that, but what canst thou say? Are you not a child of the light? So the scribes will tell you what the prophet said, or what Genesis said, or what Exodus said, and Jesus sort of saying, what can you say? You know, what do you know from experience? What do you know firsthand? So okay, let's see if there's anything else. Okay, we can move on to the next verse. Any other thoughts?
I just have a quick question. Which version of the Bible is this?
Oh, this is New International Version.
Okay.
And it's kind of like my go-to, but it's not the only one. If anybody has looked at a different translation and wants to offer it, that's great. That's sometimes part of the fun. Okay, all right. This should be fun. Okay. So just as soon as he says he's not going to change anything, he decides to change something. So, okay. All right. He wants to read that one.
I can go. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. 22, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister, B.C., will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, D, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell.
Okay, here we go. I need to look up those are probably footnotes, which I forgot to look up. So any thoughts on this one? So he said, he said, I'm not going to change anything, but there's a phrase, and you'll hear it later. It says, you have heard it said long ago, but I say unto you. You have heard it said long ago, but I say unto you. So he brings up something from the tradition, and then offers a new, and then of course, if we hold him to be consistent with what he said earlier, then he offers a new interpretation. You've heard it said, and I say, this is my new interpretation of it. Some people would argue that it's more than a new interpretation, and many people from the Jewish tradition would argue that it's more than a newish, more than a new interpretation. But you know, people are always denouncing members of their own faith for heresy, so that's part of that. So raka means worthless. So essentially verbal abuse, you know. All right.
Alice has a
Alice's hand
question.
is
I
up.
have a question, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just don't get what that means. I don't get what the whole verse says. I mean,
Yeah.
very old Testament, thou shalt not kill or murder.
Yeah.
And then Jesus is saying, but I say unto you, and then if I'm reading it correctly,
Mhm.
you're answerable to the court.
Yeah.
Now, how is that different?
So, yeah, I think the difference here is they're saying is that I tell you, anyone who is angry, so he's got beyond the action murder, which, you know, to the emotion behind it. So, but I tell you, anyone who is angry will be subject to judgment. So you can read this like anger is a sin. That the very emotion is wrong. That's one way to read it. That's not the way I read it, but it is a, you know, somebody may have grown up in a family where you were told that you don't get angry, and they may have used this verse to tell you, see, anyone who's angry will be subject to judgment and go to hell, essentially. So anyone who does verbal abuse will go to hell. So that's.
So is Jesus saying that one's attitude towards other people or your brothers and sisters is as bad as if you murder them? I mean, I don't mean to be nitpicky here. I'm not trying to play.
No. See,
the
that's
rabbi
great.
game,
That's
but
what.
I
That's.
just truly do not understand that.
See, I think that's why we're here, and I think the Sermon on the Mount is actually lends itself to that kind of reaction. I think that's part of. I think that's. You're reading it right if you're reacting to it. You know, if you just read it and you kind of scroll on. Oh, this reminds me of somebody said most people treat the Bible like an internet contract. They just scroll to the bottom and click I agree. So if you're not scrolling down to the bottom and say I agree, then you're reading this right. It is provocative. It should unsettle you. It should bother you.
It has bothered me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there are healthy and unhealthy ways to interpret this. I mean, you know, we all know in the South, and speaking of being whipped by the Bible Belt, you know, one of the things they say in the South, everybody's very nice until we want to kill you, you know. So there's something wrong with anger. There's something wrong with it. So the temptation is to bury it or pretend it's not there, or pretend it doesn't exist. And you could interpret it that way. I mean, that's, you know, you could say, well, I don't want to go to hell, so I better never, ever, ever get angry. So, that's one way to do it. So, there's a story about some women are sitting around. It speaks to Southern attitudes about anger, and they're talking about what did your husband get you for your birthday? He goes, oh, my husband got me a Mercedes Benz. And one of the women says, oh, isn't that nice? And another one says, well, what did your husband get you for your birthday? And another woman says, well, he got me this nice diamond ring. And this woman says, oh, isn't that nice? And finally it's down to that woman. said, what'd your husband get you for your birthday? He said, he got me a book of etiquette. Well, why did he get you a book of etiquette? Well, so I would say, oh, isn't that nice? Instead of who gives a shit? So that's there you go. Worthless admits. Thank you, Mary, for doing a little biblical research there. So another way to look at this that's more healthy is there's a tradition in rabbinic that says build a fence around the Torah, which is to say before you get to doing something wrong, pay attention to the emotions or what might be a first step toward something that would be wrong. And so, and this actually fits in with the kind of Buddhist idea of mindfulness, which is to pay attention to your emotions. There's an old proverb, and this has been attributed to so many different people that I can't. I've heard Emerson. I've heard about 5 or 6 different people. But the proverb is: watch your thoughts; they become words. Watch your words; they become deeds. Watch your deeds; they become habits. Watch your habits; they become character. And character is everything. Character is your destiny. So that's one way to say it's like pay attention to your thoughts, pay attention to your emotions, pay attention to things early before they become something a bigger problem. There's also a Shinto legend, which I think lends itself to the perfect interpretation of this verse. And Shinto tradition, that you have the Shinto warrior. So it's not pacifism per se. And so the Shinto warrior goes to his teacher, and his teacher says, today I'm going to teach you the difference between heaven and hell. And he says, says that sounds great. And so the teacher starts berating him and calling him names and insulting him. And the Shinto starts to draw his sword. As he's pulling his sword out, the teacher says, this is hell. And so he starts to put his sword back in. And as he gets his sword all the way in, the teacher says, this is heaven. So a sense that our own anger and our own, rage, or, that kind of that moment where we're out of control of our own emotions because we're so angry, that in itself is hell, and to be calm and to be able to be calm and centered is to be in touch with heaven. So there's a little Zen spin on that verse. There is a theme. So you could also say in the Sermon on the Mount, sometimes you can ask yourself, is this karma? Is this a natural consequence of what happens, or is it detention? Is there a principle? Is there a principle that's going to punish us if we don't do it? And I think you can take both of those mindsets and look at it and get some insight into it. And I'm gonna. My dad was an Episcopal minister. He says there's a very curvy road through the mountains, and the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. And if you go 50 miles an hour, you might get a ticket, but more likely you'll drive over a curve and die. So it's, there may be punishment, but it may not be the most important thing. It may be more like, what are the consequences of your actions? So I think there's definitely the emotions should be taken seriously. And there's another rabbinic teaching that I'm going to share when we get to lust. And I know we're all wanting to get to lust. That relates to this one too, but I want to share it in that context. And so the Buddhist tradition, Thich Nhat Hanh, who died recently, the Zen monk, a Vietnamese monk, he would say, your anger is an emotion. You don't have control over your emotions, but you can be mindful of them. You can watch the anger. It'd be like a cloud floating through the sky, or, say, oh, there's my anger, there it is, and you can meditate on its impermanence, that nothing lasts forever, so there's my anger. It's starting to evaporate, so you can be mindful of it and attentive of it. I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh says you should treat your anger like a mother treats a child. You know, it's like, oh, what does my baby need? You know, what does my baby need? And so you bring a nurturing attitude to yourself and what you might need. So, so those are different ways to also say, catch your anger early, you know, catch it early, pay attention to what it might mean, pay attention to what you're feeling. So, okay. All right. And we go to the next verse. Okay, I'll do a short one with a lot of punch to it. Okay. Who wants to read that one? It's related, it's very much related to it. I could have done them together, but I wanted to spend more time on this one. Anybody want to read it? Okay, Alice.
Sometimes we can wait a long time for me to get the computer to do what it needs to do.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift.
So if you go to the altar and you realize you're angry, you're still in hell, you know, you're still, you know, you're still burning, and then you can go do a gift instead of giving your gift, instead of going to in the rabbinic tradition, and this is really at the heart of the holiest season in the Jewish tradition, the high holy days, is that you don't go to God to ask for forgiveness if you've done somebody wrong. You go to the person that you've wronged and you ask their forgiveness. God is not the middleman. God is not the middleman. And you hear that in this sense, you know, you're going to God, you know, making an offering. It's like, well, before you talk to me, so, you know, before you talk to me, you need to go make peace with so-and-so. And so that's really at that heart of that kind of lateral sense of atonement, that God forgives people for what you do to God. You know, if you've offended God or you didn't, you know, then you ask God for forgiveness. But if you've hurt somebody else, then you should go directly to that person. Now, like everything in rabbinic tradition, there's some exceptions to the rules. If to go to that person would do more harm than good, if it would, you know, there are some, but it's set up as the ideal. You know, the ideal would be to do the personal one-on-one contact. And so in this is one of the more, I always think of this is a verse in the New Testament, but you could read it during the high holy days, you know, because it's really at the heart of Jewish spirituality too. And it must be something kind of organic to our human health. I know in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, they have the step where you go make amends. You know, you make a list of people you've harmed and go make amends to them. This sense that that if we don't tend to that work, it's not good for our health. It's not good for our well-being. It's not good for our recovery. And the 12-step model is really set up like lots of different religions can go to it. So it tends to be, the teachings there tend to be related to, you know, what our bodies and what keeps us healthy and what keeps us, in this case, sober or drug-free so that sense. So there's something, you know, some basic good mental health advice in there. Kind of tend to these issues early. And so in the Jewish tradition, the high holy days are essentially once a year. You should kind of clean the slate, don't let this stuff out. So this is better than, this is a little bit more leeway than you get here. I guess you could go to the altar a lot of times in a year and lay your gift at the altar. And then when it got to the high holy days, you're like, now I got to go. Now I need to go apologize. So you got a little more time here in the Jewish tradition. But this one does suggest, almost every week, if you're going there to be sure you're in good terms with people. So there's a reading in the book of John says, how can you love your brother? How can you love God who you've not seen if you don't love your brother or sister who you can see? So the sense that we can only be as a good relationship with ultimate reality as we are with our neighbors. So, and that leads to the next verse, which is, I could almost done these together too. Learn how to do this myself. I clicked on the wrong thing.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
I have my NIV with me, and so on that last verse, if anybody was wondering, all those A, B, C, Ds that are in there.
Oh yeah, lay it on us.
They were all just references to Old Testament texts, like see Exodus 20:14, see Deuteronomy 24:1. So they were just all referencing back to other things.
And that fits with the idea that Matthew is the Jewish gospel. That there's like lots of close connections with Jewish tradition. All right, who wants to? This is related to that one. Who wants to read that one? Okay.
This is Mary. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny.
And this has some of the same theme as the other one, is catch problems early. Catch anger before it's assault. Before you're in court, before you're monitor your emotions before it becomes action. There's a proverb that says, I'm trying to remember where it comes from. It's like, sow justice, reap peace, so pay attention to things when they're small. Okay. To give you an idea of what the Jesus Seminar thinks about such things, so far, they think it's only sure that Jesus said a very little bit of what we've been talking about. And I can't, I can't explain all their things, but about the salt of that and the light, that's up there and very likely. And then almost nothing else is that we've covered. And then this one, you should come to terms quickly with your opponent while you're both on the way to court, or else your opponent will hand you over to the judge, and the judge will turn you over to that. So that's in the pink. So there's all sorts of criteria for which they would judge whether this was something that Jesus said or not. So that just tells you when we look at the Sermon on the Mount or a lot of other teachings in the Bible, it's tradition. These are traditions that are associated with Jesus, or traditions that are associated with Matthew, or traditions that are associated with Mark, which Jesus may or may not have ever said, and certainly Matthew or Mark may never said. I was talking to somebody about, the book Matthew wasn't written by Matthew. It's just tradition says this oral tradition comes down through Matthew. So Matthew didn't write the book. It was written later. So let's see what else. Okay. Well, that brings us to the moment we've all been waiting for. Lust in our hearts. So let me call that up. This is okay, 27 through 28. Who wants to read? Just 2 verses, but I think we'll have a long conversation. Anybody want to read 27 and 28?
I'll do it. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It sounds like Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, it was. That is Jimmy Carter's story.
Yep.
When Peter Marshall, like one of these 1950s preachers, read that verse, he says, "Does that make you nervous?" Is that so? Women, I think you're off the hook, though. I mean, it doesn't really. I mean, in the patriarchal worldview here, it's all about or well, of course, if you're a lesbian, I guess. So anyhow, it's very it's not all inclusive. Definitely comes through that patriarchal mindset. But anybody remember the story of Jimmy Carter? Cynthia does. That he got interviewed by Playboy magazine, and he was asked, since he's a Sunday school teacher, and I think they were trying to, and since it's Playboy magazine, I guess they asked, "Have you ever lusted in your heart?" And of course, he said he had, and of course, that was the whole news cycle. Hopefully, he didn't.
Oh yeah.
Whatever else he had to say, was lost in that commentary. So if you ever run for election, think quickly before somebody asks you about this verse. There's a rabbinic tradition that I really like, and it's also got some paradoxes to it. I'll tell you the rabbinic tradition, and I'll tell you another rabbinic tradition that's different. That says that would challenge this as a teaching that's really that has its roots in Judaism. So the challenge is in rabbinic tradition, you can't control your thoughts. You can't control your thoughts. You can't control those. And you might believe in God today, and you might not believe in God the next day, and you might believe the day after that. And so your ideas, what you think, that's going to be all over the map. So, but you can control how you behave. You can control the decisions you make. You can control what you do. And so there's more emphasis on orthopraxy, right practice, than there is on orthodoxy, even though there's some emphasis on orthodoxy too. But the sense that and in this sense, it doesn't really matter what goes. It doesn't matter what you do in your heart, as long as you don't fall through and behave in an irresponsible way. I think if we're teaching, one of the things about our church is we have comprehensive sexuality education. We offer our kids our whole lives class. And part of what we would do is talk about, all the different thoughts people have, and that you're not in control of your thoughts. And then, there's this world of fantasy and different images and what you dream about at night, and there's all sorts of things going on with you sexually that you're not in control of, or you're not in control of your impulses, or what you feel. But you can control your conduct, and you can reflect on what's good for a relationship and what's healthy in a relationship, and what's good for the relationship. So, but it's also based on that the mind is sort of a image factory. All sorts of different things pop up in it. But you don't, if you try to control that, if you were like you essentially repress it, it usually comes out in worse ways. So you can also bring mindfulness to this, whatever floats up, you can be mindful of it and know that it doesn't last. So that's the rabbinic tradition. The rabbinic tradition says, what is Jesus talking about? This doesn't sound very healthy. Okay,
I wanted to ask about that. I mean, it seems to me that a number of these verses that we read are pretty punitive and inconsistent with the message of love that that Jesus is supposed to be promoting. And so is this just one of those paradoxes in the Bible that we have to work around, or?
Well, you can call it a contradiction and dislike it. You can call it a paradox and try to work with it. I mean, I'm actually not here to tell you that there are different messages and different themes that are in the book. And sometimes you hold them in tension with each other. They're in dialogue with each other. Sometimes they're in arguing with each other. Sometimes you want to throw one out and keep one. And so I think we're wrestling with it. So I think you could make note of the punitive. There is a lot in that thing, thrown in prison, you'll be judged. There's a lot. There is definitely some judgment tone coming through. And if you do think of it, and this is certainly one way to think about it, is obey the rules or the principal is going to punish you, like in high school or something like that. Then it does. It seems like a punishment model. It seems like a punishment. Obey the rules or get punished kind of model. And another way to look at it is like karma. Like, if you don't pay attention to your anger can have consequences that you don't want to have to live with. So I do think you can bring a lens to it, and both of those lenses are there. I mean, that's the paradox of it. When Paul says you will reap what you sow, and I think that's actually comes from the Hebrew scriptures too. You'll reap what you sow. That's like karma, if you as a friend once said to me as he was going to church, he said some people sow their wild oats on Saturday night and go to church to pray for crop failure on Sunday. So that, it's, is it punishment for your sins, or is it natural consequences for your actions? I think that's a fair way to look at it. I think it's healthier. I mean, just from personal spiritual journey, to think about it as like karma. What are the natural consequences that flow from not paying attention to my anger? What are the natural consequences that come from not being mindful of my feelings? But this one seems, and it gets it gets even more punitive. But I wanted the next part I'll put in there, but I don't want to. Let me find out. I want to make sure we've covered everything I want to do. Oh yeah, let me do one cover. But hold on to that, Chris, because it's getting more punitive in a second, and very punitive, as it can get. But I didn't want to leave the idea. So I just told you rabbinic tradition. It doesn't control your thoughts. Don't worry about it. If you're an atheist today, don't worry about it. Just do good thing. Do the right behavior. Don't try to control your thoughts. But there is one of the commandments, thou shalt not covet. So, and then once again, women are off the hook because it's your neighbor's wife, unless you're a lesbian. So they, it's patriarchal language essentially. So that does seem to kind of suggest you should pay attention to what your feelings are that might lead you to do something that would, harm the community or harm relationship with neighbors. Or so those are two. That's a paradox. Both of those traditions exist, Chris, and the rabbis would argue with each other. So about what's the most important. And this is another one where what our ideas about sin can make all the difference in the world. Let's see. Mary, I'm going to read this after I do this number. So if your idea about sin is like, if I do this bad deed, I'll be punished, kind of a punishment model. Another way, if you look at Paul Tillich or the humanists look at it, sin's what separates us from others. And how many of you seen the movie Harry Met Sally? So yeah, it's great. Y'all remember that conversation they have about whether two people who are attracted to each other, can they still be friends? Y'all remember that? Can a man and a woman who are have some attraction, can they just be friends? And of course they argue about it for a time. But if you think about that as, normal, healthy sexual attraction can sometimes separate you from a person. It's like you don't know how to be friends. It sometimes complicates the relationship and makes it you got to figure out how to manage that dynamic to it. So that's the healthiest way I know how to interpret that, is that sometimes it's there, and sometimes it interferes with the relationship, and sometimes it's something that's keeps you at a distance from each other, or moving around each other, or trying to figure out how to work with it. So that's I think this is like, Albert Schweitzer once said the worst failure of the Christian tradition was not doing away with war. And I think a close second, if not even the first, is how the traditions dealt with sexuality, and this idea that thoughts are dirty, or thoughts are, if that's the way you read it, like your thoughts are dirty, you should feel bad for having them, and that's a terrible way to read it. And people do read it that way. A friend of mine, their father was in Catholic school, and he was told by a nun that you should never kiss anyone with more passion than you would kiss a doorknob. So there's definitely I know, there you go. So somewhere in there, somebody's saying, don't have any of these thoughts, don't have any of these feelings, approach it with detachment. So that's definitely there. So let's see what Mary wrote. You want to read your own question, Mary? So.
It's fine to say for a later time, but you mentioned mindfulness earlier, and it got me wondering about references in the Bible that refer to that. And I'm doing some, it's like me having my cell phone on. I found a reference for it on the internet while you were talking.
Well, see, I think here's fundamentalists or conservatives are always looking for something to say isn't Christian, so they can be mad about it. And so I think mindfulness is all through the Bible. And I think it's at the heart of the Sermon on the Mount. Pay attention to your emotions. Pay attention to what's unfolding in you. Pay attention. So I think it's all there. But people are always looking for, this is a foreign idea that's been imported. Well, the Bible is full of foreign ideas. I mean, literally in the wisdom tradition, there's a collection of ideas. Later, Jesus says some things that have resonance with Egyptian religious tradition, and some other, that Jesus probably even had to know. So, or it was in the DNA. So. Yoga has been attacked, by conservative. This is Hinduism. and you shouldn't be teaching it. And so that's kind of in the air. But I am the light of the world. You are the light of the world. That's yoga. I don't. I mean, that's that is yoga. So so I mean, it depends on how you look at it. Is what I'm saying. I think there's all sorts of resonances. I think that's some of the resonances with different traditions are because they have some of the same ingredients around them, seeds, light, darkness, some of these images are all around you no matter where you live. And so they show up in the different scriptural traditions. So I don't know. I should have done a poll. We could ask the Harry and Sally question. Can you be friends with somebody you're attracted to? How you answer that question might influence how you interpret that verse. So how's that for there we go. So let me find now the next verse gets even more punitive. Actually, sorry. And this will be okay. Oops. Sorry about that. Oops. I'm sorry. I keep typing in the wrong thing. Okay. So I'll read this verse. Okay. All right. So this is talk about punitive. Let me find it. Okay, this is about as punitive as it gets. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. So that's it. I'll put it in the chat too. Well, self-mutilation. What do you anybody for that? So, well, I also think there's something suggestive about this too, if you think about it. So, because the first verse before is about lust, and the second verse is about cutting off your hand. It's like what would you really cut off if that was the problem? So that's I just think the proximity there that's definitely thought provoking. But I think if you read it, I mean, this is like if you were a literalist. I mean, can't you see somebody? This is to Chris's suggestion. There are traditions in Catholicism where you whip yourself and you practice pain. You're trying to mortify the flesh, this body it is. See, my interpretation is completely different. The body never causes you to sin. It's not your hand. My hand is never. The hand's never done it. And but there is this very strong tradition within Catholicism, and not just Catholicism, but it's certainly the one I know about the most, where there's a sense that your body is your enemy, and it's leading you into temptation, and you've got to mortify the flesh. There are lots of healthy reasons to fast and do things like that, but anytime you come across this a spiritual tradition where they're using punishment language, like this, mortify the flesh, you're not fasting to get clarity or clearness. You're fasting to deprive the body, and deprive the animal appetite. So,
Chris, where does this come from? What is it from?
This is it's just the next verse in the Sermon on the Mount. So I don't know where the origins of this.
Okay.
This is also not. This is not very Jewish.
That's what I mean. It doesn't fit.
Yeah. So this may be like, if it's a later edition, it may be a Greek thing. But Greek has both positive body traditions and negative ones. So you wouldn't have all those nice statues, if you didn't have that kind of affirmation of the body, and the body's an important part of things. So I think at the heart of this is, it's not really your body that ever does it. It's pay attention to your emotions, pay attention to your feelings, so it's said in such an outrageous, provocative way, but the goal is to take you back to the root, to the root, what's happening within you. So, but this, imagine somebody who's, you could see somebody had, this could be a very negative body message, I think, like in contrast to Mary Oliver's poem, the spirit likes to dress like this: 10 fingers, 10 toes, shoulders, and all the rest. The sense of the spirit and body, oneness. This lends itself to kind of spirit and body at war with each other. And there are some texts like that. There are not so many in the Sermon on the Mount, but later there are some texts, I think in John, be interested to look up that, where, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That the flesh is what causes you to sin. And so, I don't think that's true. So, but so there's my commentary. All right. I think we got time for one more verse. Now, this is actually one of the things I'm going to look up in the Jesus Seminar whether they think he said the last thing. But this is actually something everybody agrees that he said, and it's also because it's not very Jewish, and the followers of Jesus did take it very seriously. And it's also Unitarians have definitely rebelled against this one. So here we go. Who wants to read that one? That's a fun one.
Jeez. Oh my God.
This one's getting some reaction. See, this is what a class is supposed to be like. You gotta get reactive here. So yeah.
Oh my God, it's right.
This is funny. I thought Lust in the Heart would get y'all going, but this is the one. All right, that's great. So isn't that interesting? The one that all the Jesus Seminar folks are sure he said is one of the most provocative things. So no one's dying to read this one. So I guess I'll read it. It has been said that anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, and even that's, I think there's some other things where that's interposed and not put there. So it may be even more stricter than that. Make sure I think maybe it's Luke that leaves that out. Make sure the victim of adultery and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. There is an interpretation that people often hear that is wrong. There's an interpretation that Jewish divorce laws made it so easy for a man to divorce a woman that women. This was a rule made to protect women from poverty or protect women. That's not really that's not right. There's lots of things within Judaism that protect women there were lots of traditions that protected women in the event of a divorce. Alice?
This is something that comes up in the 20th century, not 21st, but in the 20th century. My father-in-law, after his first wife died, remarried. And boy, did he and she not get along.
Yeah.
They married with lust in their hearts.
See, that's what, you know, see,
That
pay
gets them
attention
into
to that.
trouble, but it hurt. They had nothing in common, and their lives were miserable. And they both tried to be as nice to one another as possible and do things that were expected of them and all of those types of things. But every time he got near my husband and I, you know, he couldn't help it. He needed to unburden himself. And he, you know, said the latest thing that she had done and, you know, yada, 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 and things of that sort. And so finally, one day I just said, well, why don't you all just get a divorce? Neither of you are happy.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I can't divorce her. I will make her be committing adultery or something like that, or I'll make her, what does the biblical verse say?
It makes her the victim of adultery. And
makes her the victim of adultery. And you know, he never really did a whole lot of stuff in that area without talking to his pastor.
Yeah.
And I am convinced that, I mean, I think it's very possible, very likely that their pastor told them that they probably couldn't get a divorce. And they were miserable.
So this is, you know, in the 70s, when everybody was getting divorced, my dad was Episcopal priest, and he got divorced, and it was probably a healthy thing for both of them, but he couldn't stay in the same church. I mean, there was, you know, so divorce was stigmatized. It probably not today, but at that time. So this has been a powerful thing in tradition. My dad had a friend who was a biblical scholar, and he would call him up with questions, and the scholar would say, Carl, are you Episcopalians talking about sex again? Nobody ever calls me about economics. Why don't you ever ask me about economics? So it is funny how people will fixate on a particular verse and take it very literally and ignore almost everything else in the book. I mean, is really one of the mysteries of it. But yeah, this is a very strong prohibition against divorce, and it's only in recent times. I would say the 70s there's always been divorce. You know, the myth that there wasn't any in the 50s or, you know, whatever, you know, that, you know, it's always been a part of who we are. But the stigma of it has been is only in more recent times, and maybe it's still out there in a lot of places, but it's certainly relaxed a lot. I mean, you know, divorced people have become president, so the stigma is less than it once was. You know, there's a measure of how people hold it against. So there's one school of thought is so this really can't really be interpreted as protecting women. It's not. Their Jewish tradition had other things in place, including essentially a fairly normative prenup agreement. I can't remember the Jewish term for it, but you know, there was other things in place, you know, that left you with something other than nothing if this happened. The other thing is there's a lot of thought that Jesus thought the end was near, you know, and so you could ask a lot of people if they didn't have much longer on the earth, you know. It's like, well, you know, if the end is near, you know, why to go to all the trouble to get a divorce? So that is, you know, that is one scholar's, you know, that is actually not just a joke. That's a scholarly opinion about that some of the ethics in the Sermon on the Mount were meant because you don't have that much time left, and it's the ethic of not much time left to it. So this you know, this kept women in abusive relationships. This is very painful, hard, you know, interpreted legalistically, actually interpreted almost anyway, harms a lot of people. So There's this, the scripture, that which God has joined together, let no one put asunder. I would say, what two hormone crazed teenagers put together? Well, that can be separated. So, I mean, it's not every bond is held together by the Almighty. So, all right. Well, that's it. Any other last questions before we go? Okay. So next we'll be getting into teachings about violence and nonviolence, and some of the Eastern traditions. In the West, a lot of times that's framed, like either or. That's one of the things we'll talk about. Either or. There's a lot of Eastern traditions that find a middle way and a middle path in there. So we'll talk about that some next week. So
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. And this recording will be on the members and friends page. So yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Oh, no problem. It was good, Chris. And yeah, I'll get it up. This will take a while to process. This one, but the other one I'm going to start downloading tonight.
So don't wake up Rocky while you're we'll let him get some sleep. So all right. Okay.
All right. See you,
Great.
Chris.
Yeah, I think if one gets up, that they don't have to both go up at the same time. All right. Thanks.
All right. See ya.
Bye.